Welcome to the Institute of Higher Earning podcast. This is episode number whatever it is when it comes out. I have a good friend of mine today, Casey Smith, over on my left, my beautiful assistant and what is it? Whatever.
Is that the official title?
Nick
Assistant?
Sicilian on the right side. Casey does a high volume transaction coordinating business that she's had since 2019, which is pretty cool. It's a pretty cool little niche in our industry. She's also a real estate investor, landlord, flipper. Well, hell, I might as well stop introducing her. Casey, what the heck do you do with yourself?
All the things. So I own a transaction company. I invest in rentals. I sometimes wholesale some properties. Once in a while, I'll flip them if I don't really want to hold them. They're out of my area. And then I just observe the world.
Well, that's fantastic.
Oh, I'm also a realtor. I list a lot of properties for investors.
What is a TC, right? So just general question.
Okay, so transaction coordinator is what we refer to as TC. And that is going to be a person who handles everything from when a contract is fully executed to when it is closed. So that's what we're looking at, a 30 to 40 day period on average. That person's 100% in charge. Timelines, monies, people, problems, making sure everything gets done.
So who's your client? You work for investment companies like us, right? That
Yep.
do a relatively high volume of the real estate thing, whatever it is, exit strategy wise or entrance strategy wise. You care about the middle piece.
Yes, correct. So I have a pretty good viewpoint of what they're trying to build. Mm-hmm. So you've got your acquisitions team, your disposition teams. Well, TCs in the realtor world are very common because they go behind the realtor, who's usually the front-facing person, and they're the ones that are just pushing paperwork. But in the investor world...
Why don't you do TCs for realtors?
What was that?
Why don't you do TC work for realtors?
I do.
Oh, you do?
I do.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we
Okay.
do a lot of work for realtors. And a lot of investors are starting to work with realtors more, and so it's a good mesh. But the profile's a little different because with investment companies, you guys are building huge teams and you're doing high volume and you're doing more creative deals. So you really need a transaction coordinator that has to be a lot more versed in things that you guys are versed in. So understanding what sub-2s are or RABs and how the paperwork happens and the timelines of which they happen. And then you've also got your title issues and your people problems for people who are in distress, right? We deal with a lot of complicated things off market. And so in my world, our avatar is like you guys. We're working with companies who are building and scaling, and you need someone at the helm that can switch strategies in the middle if you need to, understand who needs to get what, when, and where. And then you also need somebody who knows how to ask the right questions to clear the title.
So how'd you get into this? You just love paperwork? Is
I
that
got
what it is?
really
You love paperwork?
No, I got really frustrated with the lack of skill that everyone had in this area. So when I started by knocking foreclosure doors. Like I would literally map out, I would hit about 20 doors a day on the foreclosure list. And then I would go home and like stop the foreclosures and deal with everything. And about 5 foreclosures I was stopping at one time. I think I was in the corner crying in the fetal position. And so I figured there's got to be someone who knows how to do this. So I tried to hire it. That was an utter disaster. I couldn't find a single person that had what I need that could actually take over and take initiative that I needed at the time. And so I decided to give myself even more work and just create the company that could do it, which I'm not sure if that was backwards or not, but I learned a lot and I was able to see high volume. So I ended up stop investing for a while in order to build this. Mm-hmm. And it was actually pretty good for me because I was able to do such a high volume in such a short period of time in multiple markets because I did the transaction coordinating. I think at one point I had 300 contracts that I was managing at one time.
Yeah, you really started. So when you built the company, it was, walk us through that process a little bit. It's 2019, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So how did the company come from like you doing everything to kind of a more maturity level?
Yeah.
And then from there, I really want to talk about kind of your client avatar. So companies like
Sure.
ours, ones that are working well and ones that aren't working well with the changing marketplace.
Yeah, so I started because we had started to see actually a shift in our marketing ourselves. So we were doing a ton of marketing, my partner at the time, and we noticed that there were some glitches in it, some things were getting suppressed. It was also at the time when SMS became super popular. So we were like managing all that, but some of the systems weren't really developed very well. So our leads got less.
SMS for the folks that maybe aren't real estate is texting. Basically.
Texting, yes.
Marketing
Text
or buying
marketing.
houses.
Everybody's using a dialer.
Correct. And this was when it was like kind of, I mean, maybe it was earlier, but I feel like that's when it was working. Like it was a little more novel, and so people were starting to text a lot more. So we noticed some glitch in our system. So our leads went down, and I had a little bit more time, and I was like, you know what? I just want to test this out. So I started asking people if they needed help with just the transaction piece. And people were like, absolutely, you'll do that? I was like, I know how to stop foreclosures. Foreclosures were huge right then. So I started that 2019, got a huge influx of business pretty quick, and I was doing it myself with one assistant. And then 2020 hit, March of 2020. And
Everything takes a snooze for about a month. and
no,
then-
not in my
Not even?
side.
Yeah, not if you're doing curative.
No, because what happened was we were operating in enough months in different, and I had for some reason, I had a huge clientele in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, in the Northeast, and also in Florida and in Texas. My circles that I was in, masterminds. And so what happened was when 2020 hit and everybody thought the world stopped, right? Everybody was like, we can't do business. Some states did stop completely because they didn't consider it essential. Some did. We had back channels to the city officials and whatnot. And what
cool.
people didn't realize about 2020 was real estate didn't stop. There was just about a 2 to 3 week lull in which lenders, title companies, and other city officials had to transfer their security systems to at-home VPNs. So because they have to work through secure networks. So they were setting up their home offices. That's why they were a little bit slow and unreachable. Whereas everyone else interpreted that as done.
Pause.
So a lot of people paused, but the people that were working with me, we were still closing deals, no problem. So people were coming to me asking me how we were closing deals. And I said, what do you mean? There's no problem. The market's moving. And so people started giving me their deals to get done, and we just expanded. So I made my first hire in 2020.
And who was that?
That was a girl out of Texas who was looking to learn how to TC.
Okay.
And so I asked her if she would just come work with me and just learn by doing. And
Was
she
she in
said
like an
yes.
admin position, basically directly under you?
No, I
Or did
literally,
you just throw it to the wolves
I
and let it
literally
go?
threw her to the wolves and was
Damn,
like,
ballsy.
let's do
Best
it.
way.
I was maxed. I mean, I wanted to see how much somebody could personally do when they knew how to do it and like had systems and processes in place. And I don't think anyone had ever done what I had done before. So it was like a wild, wild west. I call it like the wild, wild west of building a business. So I got to a point where I was working 15 to 18 hour days. I was like, I would literally just mutter things in my sleep. Like, come to tell me a property, I would know exactly what's going on with it. Every problem you
Pretty
can
impressive. I
imagine.
don't even know the properties we have going
Yeah.
half the time.
I don't anymore.
That sounds
You get
nightmarish.
into like a zone when you're in that place and you're just constantly
Are you
moving.
popping a lot of Adderall?
No, I know. I'm not that. I don't know. I have this weird skill where I go into this, I call it my deep dark place, and I will not move. Like you do not, I won't get up to go to the bathroom, and that's what it was for months and months and months. So I have
That's
a
bad
little
for your
brain
circulation.
damage.
You got to get up, walk around once in a while, do legs day.
I have
And,
brain damage a little
My
bit.
uncle
damage.
taught me that same tactic. Different scenarios though. Yeah.
It takes a lot of work though. Like I don't think people understand the moving parts there. So when you have 2 to 3 deals on your board, super manageable, right? Like you can do that. When you start scaling and you're looking at your marketing channels and then you're starting to sell the deals, I mean, you've got a lot going on. And that's why, like, how big is your team?
11.
11, okay. So when you're doing all that stuff and also dealing with the 3 to 15 parties on average that are in a transaction, multiply that. I don't think people are aware of the amount of communication that happens and then making sure the sensitivities don't send certain paperwork to certain people, which how many deals have blown
That
up doing
happens
that?
all the time.
I know I have a client whose deal blew up because they had it sold in the bag, assigned for a 6-figure profit, and then they sold him the title. They sent him the title commitment accidentally with the original purchase price on it instead of the updated one. Deal done and closed, like not salvageable.
Nobody likes knowing what they're getting charged, right? Like that's what it comes down to. Nobody
does.
likes to
In those
see what their
circumstances, we generally tell the
profit is.
buyer to go pound sand and close on it ourselves, and then sell it to some other backup buyer for
Which is
pretty
what-
much the same amount of money.
Yeah, so which is what we're doing.
You're doing
but-
so on your average deal, right? When you're talking about transaction coordinating, you know, you use the word coordinating. You're thinking, all right, I'm lining up insurance, I'm lining up different dates and times, but you're doing so much more than that, right? You're actually doing the curative side, right? You're doing AOHs, right? So one file might actually have 20 heirs to it that you're tracking down. So I
Yeah.
just want to like add some grand and scaleness to it, not just one file being, oh, I'm just arranging a closing time and date. No, you're actually doing the curative side on it, like
100%.
helping title, clear title.
And what would you say is a percentage of your deals that have issues?
Oh,
Way
70.
more than half.
Yeah.
I would say around 70-75% is what most people are dealing. That's how we make money. We go after these lists. There's a point we go after these lists is because most realtors don't know how to deal with that. So I knew that a good investor transaction coordinator needed to know how to do that because title companies, some of them do it for you, sure. But they're not going to be eager to
They're not
spend
getting
the
paid
hours
enough,
on
right?
that. No, and they get paid way more than we do. So I knew that in order to make the company work, we had to charge the value that we were, and I still don't think we charge enough, but that's because a majority of people understand the realtor TC, and they're just really pushing paper. That is a fact. They don't really communicate a ton with sellers and buyers. That's the agent's job, right? That's why an agent is a front person. That's why a lot of people don't survive as agents, because they're people and they're marketing.
And a little like pro tip hack, right, that everybody also does is a lot of times that your charge and the fee, right, is pushed onto that end buyer, right?
All the time.
All the time.
Or split.
So a lot of times people want to say, how am I going to afford this transaction coordinator position? A lot of times you're getting pushed on anyway, right? So
Sure. And think about your time. I always tell people this as an investor. Okay, you got to look at what your time is worth today. What is it worth today? And you can easily calculate that by looking at how much money you're making on average a month, how many hours you're working, what's your time worth. What do you want it to be worth is another story. And I don't think anyone asks themselves that question because there's this mindset in this industry that is very control and I know what I'm doing and you don't know, and fear, because let's be honest, it's an asset. It's a lot of legality to it. It's not like the gurus are teaching. It's not just, oh, go ask them if you can buy your house without any money or proof of funds or even knowing who you are. I mean, how many phone calls do you get where they're vague about who they are?
Well, for sure. And also we're dealing with big chunks. So we're dealing with an
Big
assignment
chunks.
fee that's somewhere between 5,000 as a small one up to 100,000 that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So as an owner, one big step that owners I think often have is releasing any kind of control over that kind of transaction. It's like, well, I can
Yeah.
obviously do it better because look at how much money's on the line.
Yes.
As opposed to what a more mature business owner should do
Yeah.
is look who I can hire. That's why we have the team.
Yeah.
And look who we can put in place to help us facilitate this transaction, get more transactions, do bigger deals even.
Yeah.
Because if you let go of, like I like to say, a big key to our growth and our success is by dropping the ball on stuff. And it's by dropping the ball on stuff because you can't micromanage and be like micro-focused on every aspect of the business all the time as a business owner.
Yes.
You have to be like, okay, I have to actually give that guy the power and enable him to act on his own and make sure that he can do his job. Otherwise I can't do what I want to do, which is not that. I don't want to talk to buyers and sellers, right? I want to build a business. I want to work on
Yeah.
the business. And a lot of people don't understand what that actually means.
And you have to be okay with it being done at 80%. Like,
You know-
you have to be okay with that.
Walmart, right? Like it's the Walmart method. What was Sam Walmart? I don't know. Yeah, Walt. Yeah, whatever. Good old Wally. You do less, but you're doing more at the same time, right? So it adds up. In
I
the
always
long
thought
run.
the 80% thing was a valid argument when I'd listen to podcasts and listen to all this stuff. It turns out, in my experience, it's actually closer to 110% of my capacity for a couple different reasons. One is the other person, okay, the perception of the marketplace is I hire someone, they're going to work at 80% of my capacity. Okay, maybe that's right, but they're going to work at 80% of my max capacity. And my max capacity is never maxed out because if I'm a small business owner, if I'm doing everything by myself, especially if I'm flipping, but regardless, I'm taking leads and then I'm selling deals and then I'm dropping off paint buckets and then I'm talking to contractors. And when I take the inbound lead call, if I actually answer it like when it actually rings, because it's a number that I don't recognize, then I'm going to be on my game, right? I'm going to do the best job possible negotiating that lead. But I don't want to take that call because I'm busy talking to 5 other people over here
Yeah.
and I got 10 other calls lined up over here. So I'm working at about 70% of my max capacity at any single job.
That's a fair point.
So then
actually.
I hire someone and okay, they're going to work at 80% of my max capacity. Well, it turns out that if I have some separation between me and the seller, where I'm the business owner, I know what I can pay for this house. I'm doing my math that the Dodo gurus taught me, saying, okay, I can afford to pay, ARV times 80% minus repairs minus a little bit, and that's what I can afford to pay. I'm doing like, man, I can give this guy $100,000. Okay, but one of these guys sitting in the office next door is actually having a more in-depth conversation with the seller, and they're saying, this seller's saying some stuff. They're going to take like $60K. I might not be listening to that because it's not my job full-time to listen to that. It's my job to drop off paint and talk to the contractors and take the leads.
That's such a good point.
So I like to think that if we hire good people in place in our businesses, they work at way above our capacity because they're really doing one task and they're doing
Yeah.
one task really well.
That's actually a very good point. You've changed my mind on that, actually. No, you really have. Congrats.
I thought about it a lot because I'm like,
Well,
I got to justify hiring all these
And
people
when you
somehow.
think about it, but that's actually a good point because you're right. And there's two types of people that build investment companies in my experience. There's going to be the one that.
I want to get to that part now. I want to save that for
No,
later.
Well, I mean, I guess I mean to say, to kind of correlate to what you're saying is, some people want to do all the seats to figure out the right role to hire or how to hire that seat to be able to let go. But I think that there is some validity to that. I did it that way for a period of time. Because it hadn't been done before and I had no reference map. So it's not like I could go get advice on how to build this. But in reality, if they're really good at what they do, they're going to know more than you, and you should hire people better than you, not hire people that you can expect to get up to your level. But everyone's so cheap when they're building and in this industry that they really do sacrifice the quality over saving $1 or $2, which blows my mind because in investing, you've got to take some risk and you've got to be able to have some margins in there to pay for the cost of business. And I don't think a lot of people are calculating that in when they think about building.
I think there's a big value to having proficiency with different aspects of the business, but not having that be the main thing that you're doing in the business.
Sure.
So I look at it coming from more of a construction background, doing big rehabs and apartments and stuff. I think it's important to know, more or less, how to do the different trade jobs. I think it's important to know how to lay tile.
Yeah.
That way, if you hire someone that's laying tile and it's not right, you're like, okay, that's not going right. It's easy to say if it's catastrophically wrong, okay, you fire that guy. But it also helps you know the value of what you're actually hiring.
Yeah.
It's man, I'm not a great tile guy. I hate doing tile. I'm not good at it. I've done a lot of it just because, but I'm horrible at it. But that allows me to identify, okay, this guy is actually really good at it. And I don't understand why in the real estate because we're in a paperwork marketing and people serving business. We're not in a trade business in the company. Why we have such a hard time taking the leap to say, okay, I need to hire the tile guy, except the tile guy is the acquisitions guy. I need to hire the granite guy, except the granite guy is the sales guy. I need to hire the whatever it is to do the thing, instead of me well, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to put in my own granite. I know how to put my own granite. I actually kind of like granite because it's fun, it's heavy.
I think a lot of times for the investor is because they're that A-type personality and they need to be the center focal point, right? So they have trouble letting go of the power and control, right? So
we're
now,
talking A-type, not alpha personality, right? Because we're talking ultra controlling, neurotic. We're not talking like
dominant.
dominant.
Yeah, well, yeah, just that neurotic.
I think there's a big separation.
Some people some people always like saying, hey, they're my workers, right? They're my team, right? That I feed them and all that, but it's never actually empowering them, right? And man, that goes so fucking far.
Well, that's always a red flag for me if someone uses the I pronoun when they're talking about their company, because that means they're taking too much ownership of the outcome themselves. That way, if there's a good, and it's always on the good side. It's always my team did this and my team did that and I did this and I did that. Okay, that's cool, but that type of personality, in my experience, is very often the first one to say oh, my team fucked up and they dropped the ball, and they're not doing well.
And to pass all the blame.
And we hired the wrong person.
Yes.
Okay, so if it's going to be one or the other, it's got to be one or the other on both sides.
Yeah.
For me, it's our team is crushing it. That's awesome. I actually switch it, and I'm like, hey, if something's not working out, contractor, employee, that's my fault for hiring the wrong person.
Sure.
I take 100% responsibility for the downside, and I take shared responsibility for the upside on what's working right.
You hit that on the head, and the biggest lesson I've learned in business through my TC company is working with the investors and learning how they run their companies, how they run their teams, and where they place blame when something doesn't go right. Huge indicator of the culture of their companies. And I always say to myself, I didn't start a company to work for just anybody. So I fired quite a few with that mentality. And the first people to go are the ones that they feel or value are lesser important in the role of the company. And so I see this all the time. And the number one self-sabotagers that I've worked with are the ones that do just that. It's they hop in, they think they're helping by, I just went and asked them, and they're like, you're causing chaos because guess what? We already did, and we're already 2 steps ahead of you. But now you're just making people re-answer the same questions or go back, and you think you're the hero. You're not the hero of this story. But there is this, I can't put my finger on it other than you're right, it's just a character type of personality that they're their own worst enemy stepping in. And I 100% agree with you. So you asked me about when I had gotten started and transitioned into a team. It was a huge ego rearranging, for lack of better terms. Where I had a very good mentor look at me and be like, you need to read the book Multipliers, because mine was coming out of fear more than it was out of like needing to control. It's just that I didn't want to put that kind of pressure on anyone, because it was an insane amount of pressure. So then I realized, okay, I had to start thinking differently. What does it look like when I'm not in that seat? Like, what does it really look like? And when I started doing that and getting myself off, I will not jump in when there's complaints. If someone emails me, I loop it right back to my team and I say, how would you respond to this first? And then I let them respond. And that's how I think I empower them to take over for me. And then I kind of slowly started stepping back. I make them do their own onboardings now. Like I'm like, you're the one managing these people. I'm not, you are. So it's your personality, it's their personality. You have to know their systems and processes or put them in place. And so I decided that it's not about teaching, in the world of transaction coordinating, them how to do the technicalities. That's actually the easy part. The hard part is teaching them how to work with teams that aren't their everyday team. So when you've got 10 companies you work for and their transactions, and they're all in different markets, all different strategies, and all different personalities of like those types, you start to see the patterns and see who does well and who doesn't. So it actually turned into a really fun social experiment, just watching how I could predict the success of a company or an investor was how they handled their transactions and their TC. It sounds crazy, but it's true.
What is it Jesus says? How you treat the least of my followers is how you treat me, something like that. I mean,
Yeah,
but
it's the same concept.
Like how you treat the janitor or the server at the restaurant or the guy putting in tile really shows a lot about how you treat everyone in the organization.
100%.
It's easy to treat the guy that's in charge of everything, writing all the checks with respect.
Yeah.
But
He washed feet.
well,
Yeah.
we'll get
He
into that.
washed
Yes.
feet.
He washed feet of
He
people.
washed
He
feet.
washed feet of people who gave up their lives to follow him. He didn't wash feet of people who
I love
forsake,
this. I know I was
what
coming
he
to
taught.
church.
All right, but good point. So let's actually I want to touch on that a lot because I think that's really interesting, the team dynamic and the teams that are successful versus the ones that aren't.
Yeah.
Before we do that, let's go into the math just a little bit. I do that a lot with him.
Yeah, I know.
It's honestly it's best that way. To put it in context, how many teams have you worked with? Individuals, big teams, small
Oh gosh.
teams, more
Yeah,
or less?
I've worked with probably around close to 100
teams.
that would classify as a real estate investment company that
Uh-huh.
had an LLC that operated that way and had at least 2 people on their team.
Okay, so even if it's just an owner and an admin
Yeah.
or an owner and acquisitions, they're still doing, you can do a deal or two a month that way.
Sure.
And in that small group right there, right, that small company, I've still seen so many because it's almost like it's taught. Some asshole out there is teaching, go buy leads.
They're
and
called
all-
dodo gurus.
I know. It was trying not to use that. But they're going out there and they're teaching, go get this, go get an acquisitions, and then go get a VA to be a TC in
Oh,
a sense,
yeah,
right?
that
And the
is
VA
popular.
TC is nothing but causing trouble, right?
I've
Like
chewed out
they're
so
calling
many-
title nonstop just to check on files, causing trouble at title for no reason, right? Like blowing files up and what the fuck?
VAs can be good for the paperwork. Like VAs are good for realtors, but VAs don't have the nuance of the language. They don't understand the technicalities of property code and legality, and they just don't. They have such a show me how to do it and I'll do it culture. But you know that they're as much as you
It's not a
can want to
why.
automate or outsource, there is a human component to transaction coordinating you absolutely cannot get rid of. And if that person does not have the right profile or intuition or communication skills, it will kill you. You will have to be jumping back in. So the number one, I vet everyone. I do a discovery call with everyone before I hire them, and I ask them, who's been doing your TC work? It's either them or a VA. What's not working about your VA? Same thing every single time. They just aren't grasping the differences. And they're so subtle and minor that they aren't getting it. And then there's the guys that I really just don't know what I'm doing, and then they throw a VA in there trying to do novation or a sub 2 wrap, and you're like, what did you expect?
So for those people, they should probably sign up to REIAF Mastermind
Yes.
to actually get the full package of
And
how to
learn.
do all this stuff and learn how to do this stuff correctly. But back to the team thing, or back to more of the volume and scale. So 100 more or less companies that you've worked with.
Correct.
Do you have a ballpark of how many transactions that is since 2019?
6,000, just over 6,000 transactions. Now that's not closed.
That's touched.
That's touched. That we've gotten past an inspection period, probably near to close. That have either fallen out, terminated, or whatever. So our close rate is around 75%, with about a 10 to 20% rollover into the new year. So if I look at a year of what's been closed, we'll close about 75%, about that percentage will roll over, and the rest are terminations. So we actually have a pretty low termination rate because we teach them how to have a low termination rate, how to ask the right questions. We are not separate. A TC is not separate from acquisitions and dispositions. They end at some point, the TC begins, and then the disposition is in there. So you have to understand how to work together in that way.
What I love about your company too is that you hire and fire your own client. Right?
Yes,
like,
I
so,
do.
So other companies will go out there and just try to raise their hand and be a TC for anybody, whereas you're very particular.
Yes,
right?
I am
Like
very particular.
So that also goes to show for your numbers, right? Why those numbers are
Well,
high.
we started
Yeah, that
doing
seems
a little
really high.
more,
That seems really high.
It
It
is.
seems like the industry average drop rate is,
20 to 30.
I wouldn't think it'd probably be higher than that, but yeah.
Well,
I
if
imagine.
you're a little experienced, which is the avatar I go after, like you've done some deals, so because you have to value me, you have to value what I am doing and what I'm charging for it. And I'm still low. The guys that are experienced think I'm too cheap, and the guys who aren't always say I'm too expensive or want to save a buck. You can spot them a mile away. So yes, with those numbers, I started realizing how high the termination rate was. My first year, I did not charge for terminations, and I worked for a very high volume client in multiple markets, and I had calculated, had I charged what they terminated, I would have made an extra $77,000 that year.
You probably buy yourself a championship belt with that.
You know, just and I was signing those deals, and I was I was a crazy person. So I started charging the following year. I'm sure there's more of a joke there that I'm missing.
All right, we'll explain it to you on the next podcast.
But so then I'm a big KPI person, and I couldn't figure out what the correlations were because it was all over the map. It was like these guys, what they terminated, what they didn't. So I started targeting their acquisitions. Like, what questions are you asking? Like, what are these deals? Are these a low-hanging fruit? Like, how are you vetting these? How are you underwriting them? So I started getting pretty invasive questions as to who they are, what their core values are, and how they operate. And that's how I decide who to work with. And I'm not always right because people always tell you what they want to hear. But the number one thing I have found was I can count on probably just two hands the companies out of the 100 that got it right and were able to scale. The rest of them had about a 7-month term rate.
That's pretty impressive. Let's talk about that then. So since you have worked with 100 more or less real estate companies, investment companies,
Is there anything particular that stands out?
let's talk about the ones that
successful,
fail.
or vice versa, right? Like,
Simultaneous.
the ones that highlight, right? So whether or not they're the ones that fail or the
Yeah.
ones that succeed, right? What's the main deciding factor in that?
The
Right?
deciding factor for the ones that fail are the guys that want the control. Truthfully, those are the guys that fail. The ones that want to jump in and think they're helping and have a really hard time letting go of control will fail every single time.
So that's interesting because we like a lot of control in our
Yeah,
company.
it's
Like, we
really
do-
hard.
We do, well. but
We
for
like
different
control of the
reasons.
file, but we let the team do their thing also. We're very role specific, stuff like that. So we always keep on talking, when are we going to get a TC? Because our guys are doing the curative, right? Jessica, Mason, they're all doing AOHs, and so at the same time the flip side, right, can be, all right, well, they're wasting time by not being on the phone working new leads, right? But they're working longer relationships, they're getting deeper deals, right? So
Yeah.
it's fine. So we're totally cool with not having a TC, but like he says, we're very hands-on on our files.
Yeah, which that's not quite. So I think there's a difference between being hands-on in your files and not. Now, to me, this is the way I explain it. If you're hiring me, it's because you want to get out of the weeds. Okay, so I'm not gonna make you go dark. I'm not gonna completely ask you to blindly trust me. I'm gonna put certain things in place where you have access to the weeds, but I'm gonna encourage you to look at the milestone forest that I'm going to put in place for you, okay? Because as an owner, you want to know certain markers, and that's your 10,000-foot view. If you are hiring me, it's because you want to get out of the weeds. But when you hire me and you continue to dive into the weeds, it tells me you're not ready yet to let go of that, and that I'm probably not a good fit because I can't do my job well if I don't have trust. And that's the same about your team. You have to build the trust, and that's really hard to do when you're hiring a third party. I get it. but I've done it a lot. And so it's kind of like, trust me, owner to owner, I know exactly what you're feeling. That's the whole reason I started this company. Here's what I think you're feeling. And my sales calls, one of my mentors once told me, they're like, you have like a 95% close rate. He goes, something's wrong here. You're leaving something on the table. And I was like,
Is it 5%?
I was like, I'm really good at closing you because I can speak to your pain and I have a solution to your pain. And it all sounds great until you have to learn how to work with me, just like you would have to learn to work with someone you hired. You have to build that trust. You have to understand how are they going to do things differently, and is it better or worse? What are the things we can put in place to make sure that I can build that trust with you?
Well, and for us on the team, there's been plenty of people that we haven't hired for acquisitions or dispo or whatever it is because they don't fit the company culture, they don't fit the dynamic.
And I agree with that.
And it's, it's good. It doesn't mean that the person's a bad person. It doesn't mean they don't even have necessarily a poor work ethic. It just means like, you know what, you don't fit with the vibe.
Yeah.
Like something that someone said here maybe, pissed you off a little bit, or something that you said kind of like, it's not going to jibe.
Exactly.
And when we're hiring, it's a little bit easier, I guess, with subcontractors and the trades. But even then, you still want to have like you still want to be on the same page with stuff. So if you're hiring a third-party servicing company like y'all, and we do it with title too, I suppose. Like if we have a title company that's not like responsive and not good and not, we can't ask questions of and like figure out how to pursue the transaction to close. If they're not carrying their weight, or if they're not just like, if they piss off the team or whatever it is, maybe we cut them loose too.
Mm-hmm.
So just because you have a team environment in office doesn't mean that shouldn't extend beyond the office space. If you hire a third-party thing like transaction coordinating,
I agree.
they need to fit in the culture of the company. And if the company culture is broken because you have control issue things, and when I said we like to maintain control, I didn't mean like personally I'm not doing AOHs and I'm not even talking to sellers. We're allowing the team to have control of the transaction, and they're very good at that. So that's how we bridge that gap. But if we didn't have that, or even on the aspects of the company where we don't have that, we need someone that fits in the culture.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you, from the TC standpoint, you need companies that fit in the culture of what you're able to offer them as a company in order to pursue the goal of closing more transactions.
Absolutely. And like my KPIs matter to me too.
Yeah,
so
of course. You're making money off of it.
but I have a little bit of an unknown because these companies operate how they're going to operate. I can't control your consistency. I can't control your ability to close a certain amount a month, which is the number one problem these guys have is consistency, even if you
That's
closing
always a problem.
high. Always a problem.
We close a lot. We always want to close more, and we always miss stuff.
Or like the one-trick pony guys who are just drinking up those good markets, and then they aren't watching their business because they're just swimming in their cash like DuckTales.
So that was my next question, is on the people that fail, because I think I know the answer, but I want to hear your perspective. How are the single exit strategy guys doing? Because the way we've been able to adapt well is, and we all know it, we adjust our entrance strategy, we adjust our marketing, we adjust our negotiation pitch. And then the way we stay relevant and we get probably way more than the national average for assignment fees. On the back end is we diversify our exit strategy. So we do all the different stuff. Now there's operational drag that comes with that. There's issues that come with flipping and wholesaling. That's part of the reason we have to have the team that we have.
Yeah.
But that's how we've maintained profitability as the market changes, and that's the way we've been able to identify for a specific property type what we should actually be doing with that property for an exit strategy.
Yeah.
So it's a long way of asking. How are the hustler wholesalers that only wholesale 80% minus repairs to hedge funds, how are they doing?
Oh gosh, I have a perfect example.
What's his name?
Actually, you guys
That's for the next podcast.
Yeah.
You guys, I don't think actually know this company.
We're not calling names today.
I work with a lot of companies that most
You're
people don't
nationwide,
know.
right?
Yeah, we're
So which is what I
nationwide.
love.
Okay, for you out there in podcast land, if you guys think that we're talking about you specifically in these aspects,
We might be.
That's because you have a guilty conscience and because you're guilty of whatever we're talking about. We don't actually know who you are or care who you are. But if you think this is about you, it's because you need to fix some shit.
But we
Give me a call.
I also want to help and just show the pattern of what I've seen. So obviously 2020 wiped a ton of people out because they didn't have the skill with the back end parties that they needed to close deals, right? It was just a lack of knowledge, I feel, in a lot of places, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. And then the second wave came at Q4 of 2022. 2022. That was unreal. That was like the hardest stop I've ever seen because, as you know, the most lucrative companies were selling to hedge funds. I had a ton of hedge funds that I was working for and with. And one company in particular was wholesaling about 15 to 20 a month to these funds. Easy cash, right?
What
It
was
like,
their average spread? Do you know?
It was probably on average anywhere from 20 to 30,000.
Okay, so they were making good spreads.
They were
that's
making
not
good
bad.
spreads.
Yeah, no, they're
but
making good spreads.
every contract they purchased, their buy box was for their fund. Well, in the it was, you guys experienced the same thing. It was literally overnight that everything stopped. It was just this like hard stop. We
I
had
just want to chime in real quick.
yeah.
We saw it coming 6 months in advance.
Yeah,
Right.
It was a
We
hard
knew-
stop,
we
but
knew
it was
a hard stop.
obviously.
I think everyone-
everybody could see the yield signs
Correct.
coming, right? And we were actually on stage screaming about them.
And I
Yeah.
did see it too. I guess I just didn't expect my clients to hurt that badly. But I started changing my strategy several months prior. I stopped taking people that were only assigning to funds about 3 months earlier. I stopped it completely because I had a feeling that, and I could see, because I worked with so many of them and they were getting pickier, they were getting slowed down. And then I noticed this one company who had done so many of them, we had 10 closings that month or that week alone where it stopped, and the sellers had already signed half of them. And the funds basically said, my whole team was like, Casey, we got a problem. They were like, the funds are saying, keep the EMD, we don't care, we're out. And so this particular company.
Well, at least it's on the MD release.
Yeah,
That's
they
good,
did.
right?
They signed all the releases, and so it put them in a bind. Well, these guys, and I had some back channel info about them from some people that they worked with and mentored them, and because they reached out to me personally to help them. And so they didn't realize some things. Anyway, long story short, they ended up having to buy 34 properties, roughly, on their books because they couldn't sell them. And then they had to learn how to fix and flip overnight. They had to learn how to do it. They had no clue how to even underwrite a deal. And then their mentors called me like, listen, they're kind of in your market in this area. Can you like, and I'm like, dude,
DFW?
I don't know if it was DFW in particular, but it was kind of some outskirt area, an area I had experience in. And I remember them asking me, can you just show them the basics of how to underwrite a deal, like as a favor? And I was like, why me? There's so many other people out there. But they were my client, and so but they ended up falling out completely. They couldn't really sustain that level of cash that they had not been used to using. Because you know how expensive fix and flips with that many can be.
Goes quick.
That's a tough day.
And I'm sure all the rehabs were under budget.
Yeah,
And everything, right?
sure.
So-
Your burn rate is just that keeps you up at night. And so that's what I saw with a lot of my clients. So we ended up filtering through and hiring a whole new batch of clients because they couldn't really hang. So then we found that anybody who had diverse strategies in their pockets that actually knew how to do them were crushing it because they could adapt and figure out how to navigate those deals. Then there was a whole realm of people that stopped fix and flipping because the costs went up so high. So then they went back to wholesaling, and then the buzzword of novations came on the scene. And then everybody was calling me about novations. So like, we don't really know how to do them,
But I hear it fixes all my problems.
but you do, and you can teach me. And I'm like, are you gonna pay me $10,000 like your program that you just spent the money on to do so? Because I'm not getting paid like that. So we had a wave of clients that just really wanted to use me, I think, in our brains for, well, what does this transaction really look like? They couldn't really grasp it with what was going out there. So a majority of the calls I had gotten were, can you hold our hands and teach us and show us? And then what they would do is like, we would show them that, and then they would just like peace out and just go like do it themselves.
Well, I even called you when Novations kind of first came on the scene. I'm like, hey, what's the deal with this?
But I
Novations
think
thing?
we both had the same
And we
opinion
both-
about them.
Yeah, we did, and we do a
Yeah.
handful of them, but we think they fit a certain niche. So basically, you're saying the single exit strategy guys, and especially you really honed in on it too, because if all you're doing is selling to hedge funds, or if
Yeah.
all you're doing is borrowing with non-QM financing, about
Yeah.
the same time,
Mhm.
these big companies that, let's be honest, they work on small margins because they're so big they think they can afford to work on small margins. Well, when the margin aspect changes, it changes the entire business model.
Yep.
So if my entire business model is selling to these people that inherently work on small margins and their margins get crushed overnight, well, my business is out of business
Yeah.
overnight.
Mhm.
And the way we've adapted then is the same way. We never really played in that model, but we've always worked on, okay, what's the deal? And then what's the ideal exit strategy for this deal, and how do we merge these two, and how do we make money?
Mhm.
Because fundamentally, I'd like to say, yeah, we're a marketing company, but really we're a real estate company. We understand real estate. We
Sure.
understand the submarkets. We understand the construction costs.
Yeah.
We make the money by buying really well, and we make the money by selling probably better than a lot of people out there. But it really is about being that diverse. Like, eventually, if you're going to be in real estate, you got to actually understand real estate. You can't just understand, like, I can call up a hedge fund and they give me $30K more than I paid for it.
Yeah, and it also, and I love seeing the like perception of the market. So then when everything was shifting, and you've been in the industry a lot longer. I don't know how long you've been, but I've only been 6 years, which is I'm a baby in comparison. But we have seen some interesting market shifts, and I think you learn a lot. And the people that learn how to adapt, I always say adapt or die. Like you have to pivot. I have to pivot my company now because I have to look for clients that fit a different mold than before. Sure, we were making bank with the hedge funds. Great, I loved it, but it wasn't sustainable, and we know that. So I think everyone's a little short-sighted when it comes to these things. And kind of going back to the ego, it sounds really great. Oh, I run a company. I remember when I first started Atlast, a couple people approached me wanting to buy this company, and I was like, I don't even have a company. I don't even have financials for a year.
Logo.
Like I don't even have any company to sell you. What would you be buying? And to me, that's what it felt like. And now after several years, I'm thinking, oh, I actually have learned more by doing this than anything else. And truthfully, my transaction coordinators know more about real estate than most of my clients. And we have gotten in situations where sellers have refused to close unless we are the only sole communicator. So our clients, they've even questioned who our clients are. Who is this guy that keeps calling me? They're like, I don't want to talk to that person. Can I just talk with you? And it happens all the
How does that even
time.
work? Because the acquisition guy is getting the contract to begin with.
Well, some of them are
hands it
bigger, so some
right
have an
off.
acquisition and then the owner will like pop it. I have this one guy who, God bless his heart, he just is something. He's the type of guy that's like you're doing your job and then he'll just be like, hey, make sure you keep following up. And you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was part of the job. Thank you for telling me that key leadership piece. And so we brought it to his attention because he had a client that was like, can you ask this? Like, I don't know who this guy is or what he's doing, but I've already given you this information. I don't know why he's reaching out to me. And so we were like, hey, could you like respectfully like hang back? And they're like,
Stay
okay,
out of
just make
files.
sure you do. And we're like, oh, you're also going to continue to tell us how to do the job that we're doing well right now. Like, it's just this blind spot that I can't quite figure out with these guys. And I feel like some listen, like, you are so right. I had another guy call me and say, I'm the problem. I have these deals. I want to send them to you, but I think they're too complicated. And then I'm in the weeds and I don't even know what I'm doing. And then I have these easy deals and I think, well, I can handle that. And it's this like hamster wheel that they're in constantly. So I think it comes down to the guys that are successful are twofold. Number one, they're actually understanding the market and looking at factors outside of themselves and their company. And they're actually trying to understand what strategies work, learn different things, when to use them. Second would be investing in a team of trust and not scaling too early or too quickly. This whole hustle culture scale thing, which was really big in 2021, 22, is just the most successful clients I've worked with have stayed consistent at 2 to 4 deals throughout all these ordeals. And then the guys who are like making bank scaling, it's that consistency. Then I have clients that did the whole scale thing and then went right back down to ground zero and rebuilt with multiple strategies.
So let's look at a couple of different pieces of that. What are the companies that have scaled up a little bit? What do their teams look like in your experience? Like, what do they have on acquisition?
That have actually scaled.
That have actually scaled successfully.
They tend to have anywhere from 3 to 4 acquisition agents minimum. And then they actually always lack good dispo, but they have 1 or 2 decently marketing dispo people. And then they typically have an admin VA or somebody that is kind of helping with the management side of things, like leadership side of things, to help them, like an executive assistant type.
Oh, okay.
Are really, my best guys have executive assistants. And then the rest of them, I would say, I'm trying to think of the other guys. Really, they're invested in marketing. I would say my most successful guys, and that's actually a question I ask. What are your marketing strategies? I ask because I want to know how diverse are they? Are they just narrow? Because that's another component.
Because if all you're doing is SMS texting and SMS texting goes out,
Then you don't have any.
same thing as
It's the same
if all you're
concept
doing
of
is hedging
strategy.
to hedge funds, yeah.
Yeah.
What so you talked on tactics, right? And one thing I love about you talking to you is just because you work with everybody throughout the nation, so you always hear some crazy tactics. What is installments?
This actually, now I know installment contracts to be just land contract. I mean, it's just an installment contract. It's just
But
you buy on
they're
terms.
popping up everywhere. I'm starting to see marketing from all these
How they're
gurus
using
and
it.
teaching it, right? So
Yeah, how they're using it is different. So, number one, an installment contract is just a land contract where you buy it on you buy on terms and then you get the property. I mean,
on owner finance, pretty much.
it's basically owner finance in like other not Texas, but like Michigan land contracts where you don't get the deed till it's paid off. You know, it's all installment type contracts. The way people are using it, to my understanding, and Novations had a short run. Now everyone's going to installments because they couldn't figure out Novations. And that's just because Novations don't fit everything.
Still working for us.
It's just a conversation. That's the hardest part.
Yeah, like
right?
I have title reps calling me, asking me about Novations, make sure they understand how, because people call something a Novation, it's not a Novation. But anyway, I digress. So installment contracts, they're doing these like short-term installment contracts to have more control. So it's the number one thing that you have an issue with on assignments or on Novations. It's that you're contracting with somebody while also finding an end buyer, and then there's paperwork in between that passes your rights and obligations. But if they fall out, you still have rights and obligations, and the seller can still ghost you or choose to go somewhere else. There's a liability there for control. On an installment contract, you own the property, technically, right? It's you're paying them on installments. You can do a tabletop type closing on an installment, more risk, sure, but then you go to sell it, but you have more control because you have ownership in it.
What states does that work in? Because I don't think that works
Truthfully,
well in Texas.
no, I don't think it would work that well in Texas, but I haven't seen a lot of people doing it that way. So it's fairly new to me as well. Not that I haven't done short term, but again, to be used in order to offload the property quickly. So they're basically using it to eat like novate or assign it or whatever they're going to do, or sell it on the backside, however they sell it. Now that I think about that, I don't even know if you can do that on an installment. But the point is that you're doing a short term, but I think they balloon the payment on the sale.
Yeah.
So my grandma did a land contract selling 120 acres in Michigan in the 70s, and she got paid off like in the mid-90s. And
Yeah.
then she finally got the title transferred to the purchaser.
To the purchaser, yeah. So they're a little bit different.
So so Michigan does some weird stuff, but it's nothing. Even that's what I like to say. There's nothing new in this industry.
There's
Literally,
nothing
my grandma
new.
did it like 50 years ago.
Well, even when Novations came out, people kept saying Novations. I'm like, what Novation? And then they explained it to me, and I was like, I've done a million of those in Jersey, like in Pennsylvania. It's a perfectly normal thing to do because of the transfer taxes up there.
Yeah, you don't want to pay the double transfer tax fee.
Well, they changed the law recently, which makes them even more relevant, where now they charge, even if you're assigning the deal, they still charge you a transfer tax. So it's a double-edged
Government.
sword now.
Gotta love it.
So now
Doing
that's
business in Jersey is a choice.
well, actually, the attorney I used to work with there, he actually moved to DFW, ironically, and he used to do all my deed packages over there. And then he moved here, and I've referred him tons of business because he's great. But yeah, it's an interesting world, and there is nothing new under the sun. What you have, and we've talked about this before, when you look at all the contracts and the strategies you're doing, you've got to understand how they relate to your market. Who's the one teaching it? What market are they from? And why do they do it that way?
Well, for example, doing long-term lease options is probably not a good idea in Texas because
Well, yeah.
they're very, very difficult to make legal.
Yeah.
Doing a long-term lease option in Arkansas, piece of cake. There's plenty of people that have a huge portfolio
Yeah.
on lease option or lease option sandwiches or whatever.
Mhm.
So you really do have to know. I like to say even with marketing, every single marketing avenue works to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does it work in your marketplace? Does it work with your team? Does it work with what your lifestyle and your goals are personally? I don't know. You kind of got to try to figure it out. And you also have to be consistent enough to give it a good shot.
Yeah.
But a lot of marketing channels also stop working in certain markets, so you got to stay on top of your business.
That is something that I wish people understood more of. That like when I ask questions to my
Start a podcast and
clients,
start talking about it.
imagine that. When I first interview people, I think they're a little taken back at the questions I ask on the discovery call. I say, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. Now I'm going to ask you some questions, and they're like, why are you asking me that? I ask them their core values. I ask them their market. I ask them strategies, and I ask them why. And a majority of the time when I ask them why they're doing things, they're like, oh, I'm in so-and-so's group, or I heard this somewhere. That's always, and that's like, okay, red flag. Now I know what I'm working with, but I know what you're good at. And then when they tell me they do all the strategies, I'm always looking at, okay, well, what's your marketing though? Because that tells me what kind of title issues I'm going to have to deal with, and vice versa. So I really think that we need, when you're like getting into this industry or you're looking to hire people and whatnot, I think you should ask all of those questions, because that's going to do, if you're a service, especially if you're a service, their success is yours. So you have to have that insight into their operations to understand. And it's interesting how many of them don't have that insight into their own operations. And that's what makes my business so difficult, but also can be very lucrative, because when you do teach people and you have the right mindsets, it's amazing because it's just repeat business. But I've never really understood why people want to scale before they've got foundations down. It's like all of them just want to scale by skipping this really huge box.
Because they don't know they don't have foundations. They don't know they don't have time.
Maybe that's it.
They
but
think they're going to replace their workload with somebody else, right? So I can hire Tommy to do my job, but if I hire Tommy, I have to make sure Tommy's being fed, right? So
Yes.
I have to work harder and provide for him in a sense, so right?
Yeah.
Tommy said perfectly one time, you hire people to make your job harder, right? Like that's what you want to do. You want to create more leads, you want to create more business. So everybody wants to scale up first, thinking it's going to do the opposite, but it actually doesn't.
You know, that might be an interesting point on the business owner that's successful scaling and the one that's not. And you glossed over it, but it's saying is exactly that, is I should hire someone to make my job harder.
Yep.
What does that mean? Well, that means that I'm not going to spend my time on harder shit. It doesn't mean that me hiring someone to do this aspect of the job, it doesn't mean that aspect of the job then becomes harder. That should become easier. But it means that now I have time to focus on harder stuff.
Yeah.
And if I'm not focusing on harder stuff, then I'm not growing.
I'm gonna steal that.
I took it from Tommy.
You're way smarter than you look.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know how to take that, dude.
No, I like that. And then you get to a place too where you find that you're now in the business of managing people instead of actually out in the field doing the real estate work. And that for me was a hard switch, was like managing now a whole team versus clients, which is also a whole management. And then you're kind of out of that day-to-day, which I miss because that's the whole point I started the company, was to learn and to figure out how to do that better for my own team and investments. So it's been an interesting experiment, but I have noticed that about people is they'll hire and they want to make it easier, but they don't have the foundation of the mindset. And so then they attack that person, fire them, start. It's like this vicious cycle of starting it over and over again because they don't have the time to train, or they're already trained and they want to retrain them for whatever reason because they think they can do it better.
What I see a lot of people fail at in the scaling process is I think they think that the acquisition team or the whoever takes the leads and negotiates the leads, whatever they are, that team is the revenue generating aspect of the company, and that's not. They're the revenue capturing part of the company, but the revenue generating part of our type of company, where we're direct to seller, and we're hard on the negotiation on the front end. That's marketing, and that's training on sales training to get the contract for the price that it needs to be gotten at. So if all you're doing is a mathematical formula on what your max allowable offer, what you can pay for a contract, and then you're selling it for whatever the small margin is, you're not generating the revenue that you should be as a company. And then if you're hiring to fill those pieces to bulk it up and do more, then you're kind of just spinning your tires on the sand. So I think what I mean by that is on the revenue side, leads are what generate revenue. If we have a construction company, people knocking on doors to sell jobs, it generates revenue. So now people generate revenue. For us, leads generate revenue. And then the training to teach the acquisitions, to teach the dispo on how to maximize the deal is what's going to actually drive revenue up. Just simply hiring more acquisition guys to burn through old leads or to try to do lead stuff on the volume side isn't going to generate more revenue. It's going to generate more expense because now I have to pay for the team to do the thing that I'm not very good at doing myself.
Yeah, it's the quality versus quantity whole aspect of it. But you also touch on something that two other reasons I would mention about the companies that don't make it are the ones that don't train their acquisition guys well. That's a huge indicator for me. When I ask them, how does your what's the job of your acquisitions? Another question I ask, and they're like, I just want to get the contract and run. I'm like, what? Like what? Like they are the ones capturing your revenue. Wouldn't you want them to vet and verify that the revenue they're capturing is accurate by asking certain questions and like vetting the situation? And their answer is always no. And those guys are always the ones that fall. And then the second one is the ones who hire too many acquisitions and then don't hire enough on the TC side. So they have now they're generating all these contracts and then this one person dies inside because they're not making that investment in that team to manage, because who's the one who's really predicting revenue? It's actually your TC team. It is not anyone else. They're the ones that can see what's actually going to get closed or what's going to get delayed or not delayed. If you don't have a TC match, like watching that for you, then your numbers are like, how often, I mean, just a question, do you guys watch what's in closing, what's in conflict versus what you expected to go? That's what most companies don't do. I capture that all the time. I look at how many are resolving and stuck, what's expected to close. I know exact percentage per week of what I have active of what will close based on statistics. And
for us, since we do TC in-house, a lot of entrepreneurs really want to control what different pieces of the company, like what that person does and what they know. And they don't want them to know that it fits into other aspects of the company. Why? Why is that? Well, the perception is that if I teach someone all the different pieces of the company, they're going to go and be my competition.
Yeah.
Well, we're in DFW. There's somewhere between 7 and 8 million people in the Metroplex, and one of the biggest Metroplexes in this country. If we create one more piece of competition, it's not going to affect our business at all.
Right.
So that's already a bad premise. And then the second premise is, well, then they're going to leave because they want to do it themselves. Well, that's interesting, because when we hire acquisition guys, they want to go get into real estate. Maybe I'll start getting a flip, and maybe I'll do some construction, maybe I'll do this other stuff. And then they join our team. And they see the flips that are a pain in the butt, that take 6 months instead of 3 months, or 9 months instead of 6 months. And they see the expense go out, because we talk about it, because we talk about all the aspects of the business, and we want our team to be cross-trained, even though we want them to be very good at their one particular job. They say, wow, I don't think I want to flip a house. That sounds like a real pain in the ass.
I ascribe to the same philosophy. I will tell you how to do every piece of a transaction
Right.
all day long. Then they're like, oh, I do not want to do that. Like, it's
for
a
sure.
lot. It's a lot. And if you're doing good business, I actually love this conversation because it's so honest about what it looks like. And I do agree with you. And I actually try to teach my team everything. I explain to them why their investors, their client is doing what they're doing. I explain to them why they want to do it that way. And they're like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Like, they get it. They're not trying to go out and invest in properties. Like, it's a lot. They see the intricacies of it. And so I 100% agree with you when it comes to that. And honestly, the clients that compartmentalize their teams that way are my nightmare. Because they don't know what's going on. They're like, I'll ask the dispo. I don't know, ask so-and-so. That's not my wheelhouse. And I was like, is there anyone that has a big picture here?
Send 5 emails to answer 1 question.
Right.
And then probably the owner doesn't even know what's going on either. Because if the owner's doing any kind of volume and they don't have the team trained well, then they're not going to have their hands in every single deal too. Because as an owner, it's very difficult to do that unless you're doing just acquisitions or just dispo or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point, for sure.
So no one knows what the hell's going on.
Actually,
That's not a good way to do it.
In reality.
Yeah, for us, the way we'd like to train, it sounds like it's very similar.
Yeah.
We want the team to be cross-trained. We want them to understand how, because here's what it does. The team being more cross-trained in different positions, if my acquisitions can potentially do dispo, it means that they understand dispo's role. They understand that there is going to be a max that we can dispo a house for, because there's only so much someone's going to pay for it. And then, yeah, we can change dispo strategies. We can go to a novation, or we can go to a wholesale or a flip or whatever.
Yeah.
But each one of those still has a market cap. So the more acquisitions understands that, the more they're able to understand their role in acquisitions.
Yep.
How do I buy better? How do I have a better conversation with the seller? How do I provide more value to the seller? How do I solve more problems for the seller? What's that going to do? Well, that's going to make it so that now we can make more money because we have these disposition strategies. And they don't need to know all the mechanics necessarily of putting out bandit signs for finding seller finance buyers. But they need to understand that, okay, for this neighborhood and this property profile in this area, this is likely going to be a very good seller finance property.
Right.
And now we can either afford to pay a little bit more or a little bit less because I understand how that fits into the dispo side.
Yep.
As opposed to a lot of the Dodo Guru teams, if they're working on a formulaic expression for how they're buying properties, and especially if they have a single buyer like the hedge funds or whatever, it really is formulaic. But if that's all they have, then when that formula changes or when that acquisition strategy changes, then their company, it doesn't matter, they can have a team of 50. And we've seen this, I suppose, on some of the YouTube guys talking about losing millions of bucks. They really have a single binary business model that does one thing. It does one thing very well. And you can do one thing very well in an increasing marketplace.
Sure.
But when the market changes and your one thing gets a lot harder to do, you're not likely to be able to keep up with it unless you understand what else is available in the market.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I honestly, like you said about buyer, like knowing your market in dispo and like knowing your buyers, that's a huge piece I feel a lot of investors are missing. Like as a realtor, that's something I have to be super keen on and be like, well, I have one client, he's a big investor and he does a lot off market. And then when he comes to me, there's a reason he wants to put it on market. It's not like he's like, I've already tested it, but I think my buyer looks like this because this is the area. And I'm like, I 100% agree with you. Let's look at the numbers. Let's look at it, whatever. And then we both make an educated decision on whether we think the juice is worth the squeeze on the market. But it's an interesting conversation we have because then the offers I get, investors I get to see that side of things too. And the way they approach me is so fascinating. And a lot of my clients I know are like this, which is why they don't survive. It's just that they don't really look at the area or the property, what's going on. A perfect example would be you're selling a lot with a house on it, but you're selling it as a teardown, your value is going to be completely different because your houses are going up for over $1 million versus that house max is going to be around 400, 500,000. They make you the offers and you're like, no, they are not the buyer I'm looking for. Like, I want that one buyer. And so I do think that there are so many aspects that you have to know as a company and invest in to do well. And that's where we struggle. That's where I struggle as an owner of a TC company, because I'm just like, what are you doing? And then I'll call them and be like, hey, you're not doing so great. Like, maybe I could suggest X, Y, and Z. So I actually reached out to my clients and said, you can call me as an investor too if you want some help with that.
Are they receptive to that?
Yes,
Yes.
like so many. One of them called me the other day and he goes, you said we could call you, right? I was like, yeah, let's go. Which I loved because, you know, I'm not like a huge running an operation, but I've done enough deals.
6,000 transactions is better than
6,000, you learn a
There's
thing or
lot of
two.
stuff.
You see the margins, you see the averages, you know the markets, you know what's working, you know the average days on market and certain, and so time versus money are always the questions. And so I always ask them that type of stuff. So I feel like I'm like holding their hands in how they're running their business, how they're marketing, and what strategies they're doing, while also doing the transaction coordinating. And that's honestly how we've scaled, was just kind of looking at them for who they are and having that aspect, like understanding that perspective, I think is what makes us different. But then again, there's also the plus side to having newbies throwing deals at you because they do trust you because they have no clue what they're doing. It's just that they're the ones that just get pummeled and just kind of get that low-hanging fruit, which are harder deals for things, but you get the idea.
Oh, for sure.
But I definitely feel like I have this mass amount of data just with buyers lists and types of buyers and margins and things like that. That aspect of it has boosted my own investing and like doing things a certain way just by observing that amount of business.
Understanding who the profile is on both sides, understanding who the profile is of the seller, what's their motivation, what's their desire, what's their end objective, and what's their actual objective, not the objective they say their objective is so key on the acquisition side. And I think you're right. I think a lot of teams, and I think we're better than most at it, don't transfer that now to the sales side. Okay, who is the actual ideal buyer profile for this property? And if it's a wholesale buyer that just wants to flip a couple of houses a year, that's one price point, that's one property type, that's one profile. But maybe you're leaving money on the table by not targeting a retail level buyer, or maybe you're leaving money on the table by not targeting a hedge fund, or maybe you're targeting a hedge fund and miss. So now you don't have the backup buyer, the investor buyer, because you didn't buy well enough.
Exactly.
So understanding who wants this house is, it's always a guessing game a little bit, but it's so important and so critical to the success of a company.
Yeah.
If all you're doing is calling, off of investor list or whatever, calling people that happen to be on that list, that's a great asset and a great tool, but it's only one piece of the game. And you're leaving so much potential on the table if that's all you're doing in the company.
100%, for sure.
What's the next step for Atlast Transaction Coordinating Services?
I'm tired.
Oh, we're all tired. It's probably real estate.
I'm tired. Listen, we're taking on new clients. We're being really picky. We're really trying to build a super strong base of people that we can nurture through this market because it is changing, and I think people are getting used to it. And I do feel like it's new, it's different. And so we're taking on clients slowly but surely. And I would say I have had no turnover on my team in 2 years. So we've had, the people that work for me know what they're doing and are really, really good. So yeah, we're looking at possibly writing a title resolution guide for people, which would be a huge step. Talk about giving information away. So we're gonna kind of give that in pieces or sell it. And yeah, we're taking on clients. So if you need TC help, let me know.
We actually like it in house.
I think you guys should be in house.
We like it in house. We do some complicated stuff.
And by
we do a
the
lot of good
way,
stuff.
I want to touch on that one aspect is I kind of hope you grow out of using Atlast personally. I hope you grow to an in-house
Are you
TC.
saying we haven't yet?
No, I mean everyone, like you guys out there. I definitely think it's something that if you are building your company right, you should do. It's more cost effective when you get that consistency. But let's be honest.
It's difficult.
75% of the REI companies out there are one-man shows that do not have any business doing that, and there's no need for it. I've seen guys make more money staying small and consistent because quality over quantity and use this for years. And then I see the guys that try to scale and do it before they've got foundations, like I said, only last like 7 months.
That'll be a fun talk coming back sometime, talking about numbers of actually scaling.
Oh, yeah.
Because there was a lot of reasons for quite a few years why I didn't want to scale and didn't want to build a team. Because the math isn't difficult. If you know an average national wholesale fee and you're
Yeah.
trying to scale to that average, no one wants to be average, but there's a reason why average is right in the middle, because there's a lot of people that are kind of right there. It becomes problematic, and it needs to be not about volume, it needs to be about quantity, at least on the transaction thing, and
Yeah.
then you scale volume. Like I like to say, volume is the easiest thing to teach people to try to scale, and the dumbest thing to scale first,
Yeah.
because it always bumps into more issues.
Yeah.
More volume simply means that you're paying more stuff, you're paying more for the lead, you're paying more for the team to manage the lead and all that stuff. So unless you compensate by doing deals better on the acquisition, on the dispo, training people better, investing in the people.
Yeah.
Because volume is simply investing in tools.
Yep.
It's the quickest way to highlight your flaws.
Yeah, it absolutely
Oh.
is. And if you're
Yeah.
a failing business, it's going to make you fail so much faster by just dumping more people and more expense in a thing that's not working very well to begin with.
And sometimes I think there's a time for that. I think there was a time where we were just like, let's load, let's see what it looks like so we can find the holes in our ship. And we did. And we're like, it's the systems. We got to fix those because we can't get past this place unless we do that, which we did at the expense of scaling down. And I was happy to do so because we had to before we scaled right back up. So we're in a phase where we scaled down for adjustment and we're to a place now where we can scale back up again.
It's that rebirth.
Pretty easily. That's what you have to do, right? Like you have to pivot, you have to adapt, you have to figure out what tools can help you get to that level. And I would say, like, when they talk about the stages of business that you're in, like, startup, perseverance. Most people go from perseverance to scale, but they miss viability right in there, that little like middle piece. And then, there's the exit if you ever want to. But I always ask the question, like, what do you really want out of it? Because if we talk about this whole, everyone wants freedom, is this freedom? Like, is it freedom running a real estate company?
We're not scaling for freedom.
No.
No, we're scaling because we actually like the thing. We like the money, but we also like the people.
Yeah.
Like, we like investing in the team. We like investing in the people in our company. And if we
Yes.
didn't like that part, they wouldn't be successful. We'd hire the wrong people. We'd have the wrong company culture. We'd have the wrong dynamic, and we'd probably be doing the wrong types of deals.
I personally just want to come hang out with your team. You don't need to pay me. I don't need to be on the books. I just want to hang out.
We're right here, not far.
Yeah, come on back.
But
Have my team come
we
over.
always say,
We'll make this a recurring show. We'll do it on live and call-ins from the audience.
We'll be like, shit, we have a problem with this week. Let's do
we
it.
always say we want to train our staff to this way they can run the company, but we want to treat them so well that they never leave, right?
Yeah.
And it's that simple. Just fucking provide for your team, and
Yeah.
they'll provide for you. It's
I
not
think you
hard.
can tell the passion behind people who have the right mindset pretty easily when you've been around enough companies, for sure. So, yeah, I'm excited about this market, though. I'm super excited. I think people are still doing a lot of business. And I've seen teams come back from the dead. I've seen teams adapt and come back to us and like, hey, this is what we've done differently. We took it to heart. And that's been super rewarding, is having people come back.
Besides
from
from Texas, what's the second best market?
Florida.
Florida?
Yeah, hands down Florida. And then I would say, honestly, aside from that, and I'm excluding land people because land people are a different breed.
I feel a little weird.
I don't know what it is about land, but there is something to be said about
Joe
that.
Dirt.
It's just a different, it's a different thing. But aside from land, because I do have some big land that are outliers, but I would say the Northeast, like Pennsylvania area, up in there. And for some reason, like Connecticut, Delaware part, I do a lot of loans up there. And then, yeah, Florida.
Connecticut, just because of the price point, I'm guessing.
You know what, to be honest, probably. It's a little bit different. Although attorney states are one of those places where I don't love doing business because
We complicate things.
they do overcomplicate things and you lose control of your deals real quick. So I've had more terminations in attorney states than any other market.
Nick,
And
final
we're
Surprised
questions?
me. No, that was it.
We nailed it. Well, thanks for having me on, guys.
How can folks that are listening to the podcast, how can they get a hold of you? How can they
Don't.
set up
I'm
an
just
intro
kidding.
call to go
So
hire
kidding.
you as a
Yes.
transaction?
Go to Atlast TC Services.com. That is where you can schedule a call, answer some quick questions. You can find me on
Right now.
Facebook. I wish I knew my
Sign up for a
Facebook
call.
handle, but maybe Tommy could put that up for me. Facebook, I do a lot of like content and things we've learned that week and stuff of activity. So if you're curious about what's going on in the market, Facebook is a really good place to follow me as well. So those would be the two main places.
The most important book you've ever read in your entire life?
Oh
We've got to ask that question, right? We got to start asking that question.
The
We'll never ask
most
that question.
important book, I feel like that's asking me to pick a favorite star in the heavens, to be quite frank.
And those
I will be
are
really,
winners.
for the sake of this conversation, Multipliers was the most important book I read in business, hands down.
And in life?
In life, this is going to sound so cheesy, but it's honestly, I read the Bible religiously, and the principles of the Bible are truly better than any book out there. It's helped me deal in business and people and stay focused in a really volatile industry and kind of keep my head on straight, just the wisdom and whatnot. So it sounds cheesy, but that's the most important book that I read.
I think the Gospel of Mark was likely written by the most rational person at the
The most
planet Earth.
rational.
Just saying. That guy knew some stuff.
I love it.
I
There-
like the
Sermon on the
book of
Mount.
Steve.
You read the book. You read the Gospel according to Biff.
Yeah, somebody.
There you
According
go.
to somebody.
Tommy knows what I'm talking about. He's read that book.
Yeah, you got to keep your head on straight
What's the
here.
topic of the next podcast that we're going to have you on? Because this needs to be more of a recurring thing. especially
What's
all
the
insight that you
topic?
have.
I feel
What's
like
the
we
topic
covered a
next
lot
time?
of what we wanted in the,
We
in
have
the
to
next
define what a
one.
dodo guru is still.
That might be the topic 3.
That's the third one.
We'll
I'm
progress.
gonna
Will you
slow
guys
into
tell
it.
us? What do you want the next topic to be? How's that? We can
Sounds
go
Good.
from
Put
there.
those down in the comments, guys. What is the next topic that we should talk about? Because we did cover a lot of ground.
Yes.
From team building to acquisitions, dispo, different types of both of those. Fantastic conversation. What should the next conversation be? Should we go after the dodo gurus and really talk about like what's happening and why people are failing? Should we talk more about the successes, what drives people to success? Should we talk about the changing marketplace? I don't know. But let us know in the comments. And while you're in the comments, don't forget to smash the like button, hit the subscribe button if you want to be an overachiever. Turn on the notifications because apparently it helps the algorithm, whoever algorithm is. I never met the guy.
I don't know how it works.
We look forward to seeing you guys in the next podcast. Thanks for listening to the Institute of Higher Earning. See you on the next one. Bye.
Thanks.